My name is Olivia, 33 years old, and I used to believe that love was built on trust. I was in a rush to get to work this morning, so I grabbed my husband Bennett's phone by mistake. As soon as I boarded the commuter train, my sister-in-law called his screen, and the very first thing she talked about was exactly how they planned to ruin me. Did you forge her signature on the home equity line yet? Jamal needs the cash transfer by noon, or the bank seizes his new development site. Tell your worthless wife to stop asking questions about the accounts. I stood frozen in the crowded train car. The train rattled over the tracks. My hands gripped the metal pole. My heart pounded against my ribs. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply pressed the record button. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The audio kept recording as Vanessa kept talking. Her voice was shrill and panicked over the phone speaker. She complained bitterly about Jamal. She whined that Jamal was the only African-American commercial developer at the exclusive Oak Ridge Country Club gala last night, and he felt the pressure to look successful. He had to project extreme wealth to fit in with the old money crowd. He bought a $10,000 table just to keep up appearances, and now his business accounts were severely overdrawn. I listened to her demand that Bennett steal my money to fund her husband's fragile ego. Bennett was supposed to be my loyal partner. We had been married for 5 years. He played the role of the perfect, wealthy real estate broker. I played the role of the quiet, submissive wife who worked as a senior financial auditor. I wore plain clothes. I kept my head down. I never flaunted my income. I wanted to observe. I wanted to see who people truly were when they thought they held all the power. When the call finally ended, I stared at Bennett's phone screen. I swiped up. It asked for a passcode. I typed in the birth year of his mother, Beverly. The phone unlocked instantly. I opened his text messages. There was a group chat pinned right at the very top. The chat was titled Family First. It included Bennett, Vanessa, Jamal, and Beverly. I opened the chat log. The betrayals hit me one after another. The betrayals cut deep into my chest. The betrayals destroyed every single illusion I had ever held about my marriage. I scrolled through months of cruel messages. They were relentlessly mocking me. Beverly sent a message making fun of my thrift store coats. She called me a cheap peasant who did not deserve her sophisticated son. She constantly praised Bennett for managing my money because I was supposedly too simple-minded to handle my own finances. I remembered last Thanksgiving vividly. We were sitting around Beverly's massive dining table. Beverly publicly mocked the gray sweater I was wearing, asking if I had found it in a charity bin. I had smiled politely and said nothing, choosing peace over conflict. At that same dinner, Jamal had laughed loudly, pouring expensive champagne into crystal flutes. He spent 20 minutes bragging about his brand new Porsche. He claimed business was booming. He claimed he was dominating the local real estate market and that his newest commercial plaza would double his net worth. Now, looking at the messages in the Family First group chat, the ugly truth stared right back at me. Jamal had sent a photo of the Porsche lease agreement to Bennett. The text beneath it read that the dealership approved the lease only because Bennett had secretly used my pristine credit score as the primary guarantor. My credit. My financial identity. They used my name to buy their luxury. I kept scrolling through the chat history. My hands began to shake not from sadness, but from a cold and calculating rage. Bennett had uploaded screenshots of our joint savings accounts, my savings accounts, the money I had worked 60-hour weeks to accumulate. The balances were completely drained, thousands of dollars transferred out in small increments to avoid triggering fraud alerts at my bank. He sent the money to a shell company that Jamal owned. They thought I was weak. They thought I was blind. They thought I was prey. I am the predator. They did not know that I secretly run a highly lucrative private investment fund alongside my day job. They did not know that I am a forensic accountant who tracks missing millions for massive corporations. I dismantle complex financial crimes for a living. They thought because I wore cheap shoes and drove an old car that I was stupid and easily manipulated. I took my own phone out of my purse and began photographing every single message on Bennett's screen. I documented the credit fraud. I documented the bank transfers. I documented the relentless insults from Beverly praising her son for bleeding me dry. I gathered all the digital evidence while the train sped toward the financial district. I made sure every timestamp and phone number was clearly visible in the photos. I had enough proof to send both Bennett and Jamal to federal prison for a very long time. I was methodically saving every file to a secure cloud server when something terrifying happened. Just as I reached the very end of the chat log, a notification dropped down from the top of Bennett's screen. It was an automated calendar alert. The alarm was set for exactly 3 o'clock this afternoon. The text of the reminder made my blood run absolutely cold. It read, "Meeting with notary to finalize Olivia's life insurance policy." I realized then that they wanted my own life gone. Today. The train doors hissed open at the very next stop. I did not hesitate. I stepped off the platform, turned around, and caught the express train directly back to our suburban neighborhood. The notification about my life insurance policy burned brightly in my mind. They were not just stealing my money, they were planning my exit. I needed to see Bennett. I needed to look into the eyes of the man I had slept next to for 5 years and see the monster hiding underneath. I walked the 4 blocks to our house with deliberate, measured steps. The crisp morning air felt sharp against my face. Every step I took solidified my resolve. Every breath I took hardened my heart. I was no longer a wife returning to her husband. I was an auditor stepping into a crime scene. When I unlocked the front door, the house was in absolute chaos. Drawers were pulled open in the hallway console. Sofa cushions were thrown onto the hardwood floor. Bennett was frantically tearing through the living room, his face flushed red with panic. He was sweating. He was breathing heavily. He was terrified. A man who has nothing to hide does not destroy his own house looking for a misplaced phone. He froze the second he heard the door click shut behind me. His eyes darted to my hands. He saw his phone clutched in my left hand. The silence in the room was heavy and toxic. It was the kind of silence that precedes a violent storm. "What are you doing home?" Bennett demanded, his voice cracking slightly before he forced it into a low, threatening register. I kept my face completely blank. I practiced the submissive, confused wife look that he loved so much. "I grabbed it by mistake this morning instead of mine," I said softly, holding the device out to him. "It died right after I got on the train, so I just came back to swap them. I did not want you to be without it all day." I watched his chest heave as he snatched the phone from my hand. He immediately pressed the power button. The screen remained pitch black. I had purposefully held the power and volume buttons down to force a hard shutdown before walking inside. Relief washed over his face for exactly 1 second before the anger took over. The anger was a shield. The anger was his weapon to keep me in my place. "You are so careless, Olivia," he shouted, stepping into my personal space. "You are unbelievably careless. Do you have any idea how many important calls I missed this morning? Do you have any idea the level of stress you caused me?" I shrank back slightly, playing the part perfectly. I apologized, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor. I told him I was just rushing. He did not care about my apology. He needed to establish dominance. He needed to make sure I felt small. He needed to punish me for the sheer panic he had just experienced. "This is why I handle the real work in this family," Bennett sneered, waving the dead phone in my face. "You cannot even manage a simple morning routine without causing a massive disaster. I run multi-million-dollar real estate deals. I manage complex financial matters that keep a roof over your head. You sit in a cubicle pushing paper for a corporate auditing firm. You count other people's pennies while I build our future." His words were designed to crush me. His words were designed to remind me that I was absolutely nothing without him. I nodded slowly, letting him believe he had won. I let him believe his grand illusion was perfectly secure. I knew the terrifying truth. I knew his real estate deals were built entirely on my stolen credit. I knew his financial genius was nothing but common fraud. He paced back and forth across the living room, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. He was still trying to mask his lingering panic with misplaced outrage. "You invade my privacy, you disrupt my morning, you act like a helpless child." He threw the sharp insults like darts, testing my emotional reactions. I remained completely silent. I kept my posture weak and meek. I let him talk himself into a false sense of security. If he thought I was intimidated, he would not suspect that I had already downloaded every single piece of evidence from his device. He would not suspect that I knew all about Jamal and Vanessa and the totally drained savings accounts. He would not suspect that I knew his mother Beverly was the mastermind pulling all his strings. The pathetic charade continued for another 5 tense minutes. I stood by the front door like a reprimanded schoolgirl while he straightened his expensive tie and adjusted his silver cuffs. He was slowly regaining his composure. He was putting the mask of the perfect wealthy provider back on his face. Finally, he let out a long, theatrical sigh. He walked over to his leather briefcase resting on the dining table. He snapped the shiny brass latches open. He was shifting gears from the angry victim to the highly efficient businessman. "Since you are already here, and already ruining my entire schedule, we might as well get this out of the way right now," he said coldly. He pulled out a thick manila folder and slapped it down onto the polished wood of the table with a loud smack. "I need your signature on these," Bennett commanded, tapping the top page with his index finger. "It is just a stack of routine tax forms and some banking updates for the new quarter. Sign exactly where the yellow tabs are marked. Do not ask questions. Do it right now so I can drop them off before my first meeting begins." He held out a black pen, his eyes daring me to defy his authority. I stared at the black pen suspended in the air between us. Bennett's hand was perfectly steady. His polished gold cufflink caught the morning light. He expected me to take the pen. He expected me to blindly sign away my life. I reached out and took the heavy pen from his fingers. I looked down at the thick stack of papers resting on the mahogany dining table. The top sheet had a bright yellow sticky note pointing to a blank line. Bennett tapped his finger impatiently against the wood. He told me to hurry up. He claimed his first meeting started in 20 minutes and traffic was already terrible. I did not hurry. I let my eyes trace the text hidden beneath his hand. My forensic auditing training kicked in instantly. These were not routine tax forms. There was no IRS header. There was no Schedule C. The document was a warranty deed transfer. It was an irrevocable transfer of ownership for the prime commercial real estate parcel I inherited from my late father. The property was located in a highly coveted downtown zoning district. It was fully paid off. It was worth at least $5 million. I scanned the receiving party listed on the second page. Apex Holdings, LLC. I knew that name. I had uncovered it just hours ago during my digital sweep of Bennett's phone. Apex Holdings, LLC was the primary shell company Jamal used to funnel dirty money. Bennett was trying to hand my inheritance directly to his sister's husband. He was doing it right in front of my face. He thought I was too financially illiterate to read a legal heading. He thought the submissive wife routine meant my brain was completely turned off. I felt a surge of adrenaline heat my blood. I could not sign the document. If I signed it, Jamal would leverage my property to save his failing development site by noon. But I could not refuse to sign it either. Refusing would alert Bennett that I knew exactly what the document was. It would blow my cover before my trap was fully set. I needed a flawless disruption. I kept my expression vacant and mild. I uncapped the pen. I leaned forward over the table as if preparing to sign my name. My right hand hovered over the yellow tab. My left hand reached out for the large ceramic mug of scalding black coffee I had poured earlier. I wrapped my fingers around the warm handle. I brought the mug halfway to my lips. I shifted my weight, dragging my shoe against the rug. I intentionally twisted my wrist. The heavy mug slipped from my grip. It hit the table with a loud crack. A tidal wave of dark boiling coffee crashed directly onto the documents. The dark liquid washed over the crisp white pages in a violent flood. It soaked instantly into the thick paper. It completely obliterated the signature lines. It saturated the notary seals. It turned the legal text into a blurred, unreadable mess. The coffee dripped off the edge of the table and splattered onto the hardwood floor. Bennett froze. For 1 second, he simply stared at the brown puddle, destroying his entire fraudulent scheme. Then the reality of Jamal's impending noon deadline hit him. He exploded. He lunged away from the table. He swung his arm back and slammed his closed fist straight into the hallway drywall. The impact echoed through the house. The paint cracked and the drywall crumbled inward around his knuckles. He spun back toward me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He screams. He screams about my clumsiness. He screams about my stupidity. He screams to hide his panic. He screams because the bank transfer cannot happen without those exact papers. He screams because he is terrified of what Jamal will do when the cash does not arrive. He steps closer to me, his chest heaving, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He calls me a useless, bumbling idiot. He tells me I cannot do a single thing right. He waves his throbbing hand at the ruined documents. He bends over the table, desperately trying to peel the soaked pages apart. The wet paper tears in his hands. The ink bleeds and runs down his fingers. His panic is palpable. It radiates off him in waves. I stood perfectly still. I kept my eyes wide. I practiced looking terrified. I whispered a frantic apology. I grabbed a kitchen towel and dabbed uselessly at the edge of the table. Inside my own mind, I was perfectly calm. I watched him unravel. I watched the confident real estate broker turn into a desperate, sweating criminal whose timeline was rapidly collapsing. He threw the wet, torn pages back onto the table. He grabbed his hair with both hands, pacing the floor like a trapped animal. He was running out of time, and he knew it. The sharp, metallic sound of a key sliding into the front door lock cut through his shouting. The heavy brass deadbolt clicked open. The hinges groaned. Beverly walked into the foyer. My mother-in-law always used her spare key without knocking. She stepped into the house wearing an immaculate cream-colored suit and carrying a designer handbag. She stopped in the entryway. Her sharp eyes immediately swept the room. She saw Bennett panting and clutching his bruised hand. She saw the cracked drywall. She saw me holding a damp towel. She looked down at the mahogany table. She saw the ruined coffee-soaked deed transfer. Beverly understood the situation in a fraction of a second. She knew exactly what those documents were. She knew exactly what Jamal's deadline was. Her jaw tightened into a rigid line. She did not yell like Bennett. She possessed a much colder, much more dangerous kind of anger. She walked slowly toward the dining table, her heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. She stopped right in front of me. She did not look at the coffee. She looked directly into my eyes. She glared at me with absolute, undisguised venom. She turned her head slightly toward her son. "Clean this mess up," she ordered, her voice completely devoid of emotion. She looked back at me. Her expression was a terrifying promise of retribution. "We are having a serious family meeting tonight," she announced. "Be there." She turned on her heel and walked straight into the kitchen, taking total control of my house. I looked down at the ruined papers. The battle had officially begun. The heavy front door chimed open right at exactly 7 o'clock. Vanessa's sharp, irritating laughter echoed down the long hallway before she even stepped into the living room. Jamal followed close behind her, completely filling the large door frame. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit that screamed new money. A silk pocket square peeked out from his chest. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He projected total dominance. He projected absolute success. He projected a ridiculous lie. I knew the suit was bought on credit. I knew the shoes were paid for with my stolen funds. He walked in, clapping Bennett on the shoulder, booming about a non-existent commercial lease he had supposedly closed that afternoon. His false confidence was nauseating. Beverly stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid and expectant. She pointed a manicured finger at the leather armchair in the center of the room. "Sit down, Olivia," Beverly commanded. Her voice left absolutely no room for negotiation. She treated me like an employee called in for a disciplinary hearing. I walked over and sat on the very edge of the leather cushion. I kept my shoulders slumped. I kept my gaze lowered. I let them see the frightened, submissive wife they expected to see. Bennett took his place beside his mother, crossing his arms over his chest. Vanessa sat next to Jamal on the sofa, crossing her legs and examining her freshly manicured nails. The vipers were officially gathered. They formed a tight half-circle around my chair. The coordinated psychological attack commenced immediately. Beverly ruthlessly initiated the verbal strike. She spoke in a low, soothing tone that dripped with condescension. "We are all very worried about you, Olivia." Beverly began, her cold eyes sweeping over my plain clothes. "Bennett just told us about the incident this morning. Destroying important family documents with coffee is not normal behavior. You are clearly cracking under pressure." Bennett stepped in right on cue. He leaned forward, adopting a look of deep manufactured concern. "Your auditing job is destroying your mental health, Olivia. You are paranoid. You are clumsy. You are exhausted. You cannot even manage a simple morning routine without a total breakdown." I looked from Bennett to Beverly. They were weaving a terrifying narrative. They were painting me as an unstable, hysterical woman who could not be trusted with her own mind. Vanessa chimed in with a dramatic sigh. "You really do look terrible, Olivia. You are dragging Bennett down with your stress. It is selfish, honestly. They attacked my competence. They attacked my sanity. They attacked my value to the family. They wanted me to believe I was breaking apart. The solution they offered was perfectly calculated." Beverly placed a fresh stack of legal papers on the coffee table right in front of me. "We want to help you heal," Beverly stated smoothly. "We want you to resign from your stressful job. We want you to sign this complete financial power of attorney over to Bennett. Let him carry the heavy burden of managing the family wealth. You just need to rest." I silently stared at the thick legal document. Complete and total financial power of attorney. It would give Bennett the legal right to drain every account, sell my property, and hand Jamal the cash he desperately needed to cover his fraudulent loans. Jamal leaned back heavily into the soft sofa cushions. He shot his cuffs, revealing a massive diamond-encrusted gold watch. He began tapping the crystal face of the watch with his index finger. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was loud and grating in the quiet room. "You have to understand how true family wealth operates," Olivia Jamal lectured, his voice booming with arrogant authority. "True wealth requires aggressive moves. It requires leveraging assets and taking calculated risks. Your tiny corporate mind simply cannot comprehend the high-stakes game we play. You audit spreadsheets for a living. We build empires. You need to step aside and let the men handle the real business before your anxiety ruins everything." I watched him tap that expensive watch. I remembered last Christmas when he gave Vanessa a diamond tennis bracelet and told my father that cautious saving was for losers. I remembered him mocking my modest car while tossing his Porsche keys on the counter. He built his entire empire on predatory loans, fraudulent mortgages, and my stolen credit. His pathetic, fragile empire was nothing but a flimsy house of cards, just waiting for a single gust of wind to destroy it. I slowly looked down at my shaking hands. I purposely made them tremble. I let a single salty tear slip down my cheek. I looked up at Bennett with wide, defeated eyes. "You really think I need to quit?" I asked, my voice cracking perfectly. Bennett smiled, a soft, triumphant smile. "I know you do, sweetheart. I will take care of everything." I nodded slowly, letting my shoulders drop in total surrender. "Okay," I whispered. "I will sign the power of attorney. I will sign it tomorrow morning when the notary is open." A collective wave of relief washed over the entire room. The tension evaporated instantly. Jamal slapped his knee and let out a loud, booming laugh. Beverly actually smiled, her rigid posture relaxing. Vanessa immediately sprang up from the sofa and practically skipped to the kitchen to retrieve the wine glasses. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully broken me. Bennett popped the cork on an expensive bottle of red wine, pouring generous glasses to celebrate their impending victory. They toasted to family. They toasted to the future. I held my wine glass in my right hand, offering a meek smile. Under the table, my left hand rested on my phone. While they drank their celebratory wine, I opened my encrypted email application. I typed a rapid, silent message to my private wealth manager. Freeze all hidden assets. Block all external transfers. Initiate lockdown protocol immediately. I hit send. The trap was set. The cold, sterile fluorescent lights of my downtown office offered a stark contrast to the emotional slaughterhouse I had survived the night before. I sat at my sleek glass desk at exactly 7 in the morning. My hands did not tremble today. My heart did not race. I was no longer the submissive, terrified wife backed into a corner by a family of vipers. I was a senior forensic auditor. I was a hunter stepping into my own territory. I booted up my workstation and launched our proprietary forensic accounting software. The program was designed to track international money laundering, dismantle corporate embezzlement, and trace microscopic financial anomalies across global banking networks. Bennett and Jamal thought they were financial geniuses. They thought my tiny corporate mind could not comprehend their high-stakes game. They were arrogant. They were sloppy. They were entirely unprepared for what I could do with a keyboard and a raw data feed. I started with the routing numbers I had pulled from Bennett's cloned phone. I fed the encrypted data into the tracking matrix. The software immediately began chewing through the digital breadcrumbs. I watched the screen as green lines of data mapped out the flow of the money they had bled from my accounts. The money did not go into legitimate investments. The money did not go into high-yield mutual funds. The money moved through a chaotic maze of poorly constructed shell companies. I traced the first wire transfer. I traced the second wire transfer. I traced the third. Every single green line converged on a single destination. Apex Holdings LLC. Jamal's commercial real estate firm. I bypassed the standard security protocols and pulled the public tax filings, cross-referencing them with the dark ledgers Bennett had saved on his mobile drive. The financial architecture of Jamal's supposed empire laid bare on my dual monitors. It was a disaster. It was a gaping, bottomless black hole. Jamal was not developing commercial real estate. He had 0 active construction permits. He had 0 completed projects. He was running a textbook rudimentary Ponzi scheme. I watched the numbers tell the undeniable truth. Millions of dollars flowed in from new, unsuspecting investors. Within 48 hours, those exact same funds were wired back out to pay the guaranteed returns promised to the older investors. There was no actual profit. There was no actual business. It was a massive, fragile house of cards waiting to collapse under its own weight. Jamal was bleeding cash at an exponential rate. He needed a massive influx of clean, untraceable capital just to keep the lights on for another month. That was why they needed my inheritance. That was why they needed my property. That was why they were trying to force my hand with a power of attorney. I dug deeper into the Apex Holdings ledger. I combed through the operational expenses. A particular string of recurring payments caught my eye. They were categorized under miscellaneous consulting fees and outsourced vendor retainers. The payments were large, frequent, and entirely devoid of proper invoicing. I ran the routing numbers associated with the vendor accounts. They led directly to a luxury high-rise apartment building in the financial district. I pulled the property records. I pulled the lease agreement. The apartment was not leased to a consulting firm. It was leased to a woman named Chloe. I cross-referenced the name with Jamal's social media orbit. Chloe was a 24-year-old fitness instructor. Jamal was paying her rent. Jamal was paying for her designer clothes. Jamal was funding a completely secret life with a mistress, while his wife Vanessa flaunted her diamond tennis bracelets and looked down her nose at my modest lifestyle. The ultimate betrayal was not just Jamal's infidelity. The ultimate betrayal was hidden in the digital authorization logs attached to the apartment lease and the monthly wire transfers. The digital signature approving every single payment to the mistress did not belong to Jamal. The signature belonged to Bennett. Bennett was managing the slush fund. Bennett was covering the paper trail. Bennett was actively and deliberately helping Jamal deceive his own sister. They were a brotherhood of liars. They protected each other's secrets. They enabled each other's frauds. They destroyed the women in their lives with absolute impunity. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I captured every ledger. I downloaded every lease agreement. I saved every time-stamped authorization log. I built an impenetrable digital fortress of evidence. I had the power to send both of them to federal prison. I had the power to destroy Vanessa's illusion of a perfect marriage. I had everything I needed to burn their vicious little empire to the ground. Then a red notification banner flashed across the top right corner of my primary monitor. It was an automated alert from my private wealth management portal. Despite the freeze I had initiated the night before, the system flagged a highly suspicious external override attempt. I clicked the notification opening the pending transaction queue. My breath caught in my throat. It was a commercial wire transfer request. The amount requested was $2 million. The destination was an offshore holding account directly linked to Apex Holdings. The transfer was heavily expedited. It was scheduled to clear the international banking protocols this coming Friday at noon. I opened the attached security authorization file. To move a sum that large from my highly restricted trust, the bank required substantial liquid collateral and a verified physical signature. I stared at the scanned document attached to the wire request. It was a standard promissory note pledging the entirety of my remaining trust assets to cover the $2 million transfer. At the bottom of the page, resting heavily on the solid black line, was my signature. It was a flawless, meticulous forgery. I stared at the forged signature for exactly 3 seconds before closing my laptop. Panic is a useless emotion. Action is the only currency that matters. I grabbed my coat, bypassed my manager, and walked straight out of the auditing firm. I hailed a cab and gave the driver an address in the financial district. I was not going to the police. I was going to Marcus Sterling. Marcus was a private equity tycoon who operated out of a heavily secured, unmarked building. He was ruthless, brilliant, and completely terrifying to anyone who sat across a negotiating table from him. He was also my silent business partner. 5 years ago, I audited a massive corporate merger for his firm. I found a microscopic discrepancy that saved him $40 million. He recognized my talent immediately. While Bennett was busy calling me a glorified paper pusher, Marcus was secretly backing my private investments. He knew my true net worth. He knew I was a multimillionaire operating completely in the shadows. I walked past his security detail and stepped into his vast glass-walled office. Marcus sat behind a solid marble desk. He looked up, his sharp eyes immediately registering my unannounced arrival. "We have a situation," I stated, dropping the printed wire transfer request and the digital ledgers directly onto his marble desk. Marcus did not ask questions. He picked up the documents and began to read. His face remained a mask of absolute calm as his eyes scanned the forged signature, the offshore routing numbers, and the undeniable proof of Jamal's Ponzi scheme. He traced the lines of fake commercial leases. He examined the recurring payments to the 24-year-old fitness instructor. He saw Bennett's digital authorization logs covering the entire mess. "Your husband and his brother-in-law are remarkably stupid men," Marcus finally said, setting the papers down. "This is a grade school fraud operation. They are bleeding cash and trying to use your trust as a tourniquet. How do you want to play this?" I sat down in the leather chair opposite him. "I want to own them," I said. "I want to own every single breath they take. I do not just want to block this $2 million wire transfer. I want to sever their lifelines entirely." Marcus leaned forward, steepling his fingers together. "Jamal's primary commercial debt is held by a mid-tier lender in Chicago. I happen to know the executive board. They are already getting nervous about Jamal's lack of development progress. If I make a call right now, my firm can purchase his entire debt portfolio by 3 o'clock this afternoon. We buy the debt at a slight premium to guarantee immediate transfer." I met his gaze without blinking. "Do it. Use the liquid capital from my hidden holding company. I want that debt." Marcus smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. "You realize what this means, Olivia. The second we execute this purchase, Jamal's shell company is legally bound to you. You become his primary creditor. You hold the mortgages on his properties. You hold the liens on his assets. If he misses a single payment, you have the legal authority to seize everything he claims to own. He will be working for you, and he will not even know it. Make the call I commanded. Marcus picked up his private phone. He dialed a direct line to Chicago. He spoke in low, rapid financial shorthand. He utilized his immense corporate weight to fast-track the acquisition. Within 20 minutes, the digital contracts were drafted. Within 30 minutes, the funds were wired from my hidden accounts. Within 45 minutes, I legally owned every single asset Jamal falsely paraded around town. I sat back in the leather chair and let the reality wash over me. The shift in power was absolute. For years I had played the meek, submissive wife. For years I had let Bennett talk down to me, belittle my career, and treat me like an incompetent child. I had let Vanessa mock my clothes and my quiet demeanor. I had let Jamal lecture me about the reality of aggressive wealth. They thought I was weak. They thought I was blind. They thought I was prey. I am the predator. I stood up and smoothed the front of my skirt. Marcus handed me a secure tablet confirming the finalized debt transfer. The trap was perfectly laid. Bennett and Jamal thought they were days away from stealing $2 million of my money. Instead, they had just handed me the keys to their entire fraudulent empire. I thanked Marcus and walked out of the building. The afternoon sun felt warm and invigorating. I was no longer playing defense. I was dictating the terms of their destruction. I sat on a park bench and pulled my phone from my pocket. I needed to check my personal email to confirm my wealth manager had successfully frozen the forged wire transfer. As I unlocked the screen, a social media notification popped up. It was a new post from Vanessa. I clicked the notification. The image loaded instantly on my screen. Vanessa was sitting at a table in a high-end, exclusive restaurant. She was holding up a brand-new limited edition designer handbag. The leather was pristine. The gold hardware gleamed under the restaurant lighting. She had a smug, arrogant smile plastered across her face. The caption beneath the photo read, "Spoiled rotten. Thank you to my amazing husband Jamal for the best surprise gift ever. True wealth is treating your family right." I stared at the caption. I looked at the gleaming designer bag. I knew exactly which credit card Jamal used to make those lavish purchases. It was the primary corporate expense card tied directly to his commercial real estate firm. The exact same firm that I now legally owned. The exact same firm whose accounts I had just instructed Marcus to place under immediate strict forensic review. I locked my phone and slid it back into my coat pocket. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Vanessa was posing for the world, thanking her amazing husband for his boundless generosity. She had absolutely no idea that the credit card she was holding was scheduled to bounce in exactly 2 hours. I sent a text message to Vanessa before I even left the park bench. I kept my tone breezy and completely normal. I invited her to lunch at Le Coucou, one of the most exclusive and notoriously expensive French restaurants in the city. I knew she would never turn down a chance to be seen in a room full of Manhattan elites. More importantly, I knew she would never pass up an opportunity to flaunt her newly acquired designer handbag in my face. She replied within 60 seconds, accepting the invitation with a string of enthusiastic emojis. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early and secured a highly visible booth in the center of the main dining room. When Vanessa finally made her entrance, she treated the restaurant floor like her personal runway. She was draped in recognizable logos from head to toe. She carried the pristine new handbag exactly how a child carries a shiny new toy, making sure the gold hardware caught the ambient lighting. She slid into the booth opposite me, immediately placing the oversized bag right on top of the crisp white tablecloth. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask about my morning or the auditing firm. She launched straight into a relentless, suffocating monologue about Jamal. She talked about his aggressive business strategies. She talked about his massive real estate developments. She casually mentioned the cost of her new bag, feigning a sigh about how much Jamal loved to spoil her. She told me that true wealth was a mindset, a level of financial dominance that regular corporate employees like me could never truly grasp. I sat back against the leather booth and listened to every single word. I sipped my sparkling water. I nodded politely at all the right intervals. I let her dig her grave of arrogance as deep as she possibly could. It was an intoxicating experience. I was sitting across from a woman bragging about a financial empire that I now legally owned in its entirety. She was boasting about the purchasing power of a corporate credit card that my wealth manager had frozen completely solid just 2 hours ago. When the waiter approached to clear our plates, Vanessa moved with practiced theatrical speed. She snatched the leather check folder before it even touched the table. She waved her manicured hand at me, insisting that she cover the bill. She claimed I looked entirely too stressed and needed to be pampered. She pulled the heavy metal corporate card from her wallet and slid it into the folder with a loud, satisfying thud. She handed it back to the waiter with a dismissive flick of her wrist. I took a slow sip of my espresso. I watched the waiter walk over to the point-of-sale terminal. I watched him run the heavy metal card. I watched the machine blink. I watched him swipe it a second time. 2 minutes later, the waiter returned to our table. His posture was stiff. His expression was a portrait of professional discomfort. He leaned down, keeping his voice respectfully low to avoid embarrassing her. "I am so sorry, madam," the waiter murmured, holding the leather folder out to her. "The card has been declined." Vanessa froze. Her haughty smile shattered instantly. She let out a loud, abrasive scoff that caused a nearby table to turn and look. She snatched the card back, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson. She loudly proclaimed that the bank must have flagged the card for fraud protection because she and Jamal spend such massive amounts of money internationally. She assured the waiter it was merely a security protocol. She dug her hand back into her wallet. She pulled out a personal platinum credit card and slapped it onto the table. "Try that one," she ordered, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed panic. The waiter took the card and walked away. The silence at our table was suddenly deafening. Vanessa refused to make eye contact with me. She stared fixedly at the white tablecloth, her breathing growing shallow and rapid. The waiter returned even faster this time. He did not lean in. He simply placed the card on the table. "Declined again, madam," he said. His tone was perfectly polite, but his patience was clearly wearing thin. "Do you perhaps have another form of payment?" Vanessa's face drained of all color. The arrogant, wealthy socialite vanished. A desperate, terrified woman took her place. She grabbed her phone from the table and immediately dialed Jamal. I watched her press the phone to her ear. I watched her eyes widen in fear as it went straight to voicemail. She hung up and frantically dialed again. Voicemail. Jamal was currently experiencing his own financial apocalypse across town. He was not going to answer. She slammed the phone down. Her panic rapidly, violently mutated into rage. She turned her humiliation entirely onto the waiter. She raised her voice, shattering the quiet elegance of the dining room. She started screaming about incompetent staff. She started screaming about faulty machines. She demanded the manager immediately. She claimed they were trying to humiliate her and threatened to have the entire staff fired by the end of the day. I let her scream for exactly 30 seconds. Then I smoothly unclasped my modest leather purse. I pulled out a thick stack of crisp $100 bills. I reached across the table and handed the cash directly to the waiter. "Keep the change," I said quietly. The waiter took the money with obvious relief, thanked me, and quickly walked away. Vanessa stopped screaming. She stared at the empty space where the bill had just been. Her chest heaved. Her hands were shaking violently on top of the table. I looked her directly in the eyes. I gave her a soft, deeply pitying smile. It was the exact same condescending smile she and Beverly had given me for 5 years. "It happens to everyone, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice gentle and patronizing. "Do not worry about it at all. We all experience hard times." The utter humiliation of being pitied by the weak paper-pushing sister-in-law completely broke her spirit. She grabbed her new handbag, slid out of the booth, and practically ran out of the restaurant without saying a single word. I finished the last drop of my espresso, paid for a town car, and headed back to the suburbs. The game had escalated beautifully. I unlocked the front door to our house and stepped into the foyer. The quiet suburban stillness I expected was entirely absent. Heavy footsteps pounded against the floorboards upstairs. I walked up the staircase and stepped into our master bedroom. Bennett was in the middle of the room. He had his large leather overnight bag open on the bed. He was throwing dress shirts, ties, and toiletries into the bag with frantic, uncoordinated movements. He spun around when he heard my footsteps. His eyes were wild. His face was slick with sweat. He looked absolutely terrified. "I have a trip!" Bennett blurted out, his voice breathless and ragged. "I have a sudden last-minute business trip. I have to fly out to the coast immediately. I need to secure some emergency funding for a massive new project. Do not wait up for me." I calmly reached behind my back and pushed the heavy oak door shut until I heard the solid metallic click of the lock engaging. I stepped squarely in front of the exit. I planted my feet firmly on the hardwood floor. I crossed my arms over my chest. The trembling, terrified wife they had all mocked at the family meeting completely vanished. The woman who had just orchestrated the hostile takeover of their entire financial world took her place. "There is no business trip," I stated. My voice was entirely flat. It contained zero warmth. It contained zero fear. "There is no emergency funding. There is only a sinking ship, and you are scrambling for a lifeboat." Bennett froze. The balled-up silk tie in his hand dropped to the mattress. He stared at me, his handsome face contorting with a mixture of confusion and rising panic. He was waiting for me to cry. He was waiting for me to ask him to stay and fix our marriage. He was not prepared for the absolute ice in my tone. "I do not know what you are talking about." Bennett snapped, his voice instantly defensive. "I am handling the family wealth. You need to let me work." I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the thick stack of printed bank ledgers. I tossed them onto the bed. The crisp white pages landed directly on top of his packed dress shirts. "I let you work," I replied smoothly. "And your work is incredibly sloppy. You drained our high-yield savings account 30 days ago. You liquidated the mutual funds last week. You wired $300,000 directly to Apex Holdings to cover Jamal's fraudulent dividend payouts, and then you authorized $35,000 to cover rent and shopping sprees for a 24-year-old fitness instructor named Chloe." All the color vanished from Bennett's face. He looked at the printed ledgers. He looked at me. The carefully constructed mask of the caring, burdened husband shattered into a million jagged pieces. The man standing in front of me was a cornered animal. He did not apologize. He did not beg for forgiveness. He did not try to explain away the missing funds. He pivoted instantly to ruthless physical aggression. Bennett closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. He grabbed my shoulders and shoved me backward. My spine hit the edge of the mahogany dresser hard, the wood biting into my skin. I did not wince. I kept my eyes locked directly onto his. He leaned in, pressing his entire body weight against me, towering over me to utilize every single inch of his physical advantage. His breath smelled of stale coffee and raw fear. "You are snooping through secure corporate files." Bennett snarled, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. "You have absolutely no idea what you are looking at. You are not a financial expert. You are an unstable, paranoid woman who is cracking under the pressure of her miserable little life." "I know exactly what I am looking at," I whispered back, completely unbothered by his proximity. "I am looking at a man who forged my signature to steal $2 million from my trust fund." His hands tightened on my shoulders, his fingers digging into my collarbones like iron claws. "You listen to me," Bennett commanded, his face twisted in ugly rage. "You are going crazy. You are imagining things. You are making things up because your mind is fragile. You see conspiracies where there is only family management." The words struck me, but not with fear. They struck me with profound crystalline clarity. My heart pounded a steady, triumphant rhythm against my ribs. I had heard those exact words before. 5 years ago, the day after our wedding reception, I had asked Beverly where the large box of cash envelopes from our guests had gone. Over $30,000 in wedding gifts had simply vanished from the gift table. Beverly had cornered me in the kitchen, towering over me just like this. She had looked down her nose at me, her eyes filled with venom, and she had said those exact words. "You are making things up because your mind is fragile. You see conspiracies where there is only family management." It was not just a shared attitude. It was a meticulously rehearsed family playbook. They used the exact same psychological warfare to crush anyone who questioned their theft. They labeled their victims as insane to discredit the truth. They relied on making their targets feel small, confused, and utterly crazy. The realization washed away any lingering doubt I had about destroying them. "If you say a single word of this delusion to anyone," Bennett threatened, leaning closer, "until our noses almost touched, I will call a doctor today. I will have you placed on an involuntary psychiatric hold. I will tell the judge you are a danger to yourself. I will take full conservatorship over your medical and financial decisions. I will lock you in a ward, Olivia, and no one will ever believe a single word you say." He expected me to shatter. He expected the threat of forced institutionalization to bring me to my knees in absolute terror. He expected me to beg for his mercy. I smiled. It was a cold, vacant smile that made him involuntarily loosen his grip. "You cannot afford a lawyer to petition a judge, Bennett," I said softly, my voice ringing with total authority. "You literally cannot afford the gas to drive to the courthouse. Your accounts are empty, the credit cards are maxed out, and your entire financial life is about to detonate." Bennett stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. He grabbed his overnight bag from the bed. He shoved past me with enough force to knock my shoulder into the wall, ripped the bedroom door open, and stormed out into the hallway. I stood in the center of the bedroom and listened. I heard his heavy footsteps pounding down the wooden stairs. I heard the front door jerk open. I heard it slam shut with earth-shattering force. The house fell completely silent. I did not collapse onto the floor. I did not shed a single tear. I pulled my mobile phone from my pocket. I opened my contacts list and bypassed the standard emergency numbers. I dialed a premium private security firm that catered exclusively to high-net-worth individuals facing immediate threats. A dispatcher answered on the second ring. "My name is Olivia," I stated clearly, projecting absolute command. "I need a master locksmith at my residence immediately to rekey every exterior point of entry. I also require a full perimeter security team deployed to my location within the hour. No one enters this property without my direct verbal authorization." I stared at the forged signature for exactly 3 seconds before closing my laptop. Panic is a useless emotion. Action is the only currency that matters. I grabbed my coat, bypassed my manager, and walked straight out of the auditing firm. I hailed a cab and gave the driver an address in the financial district. I was not going to the police. I was going to Marcus Sterling. Marcus was a private equity tycoon who operated out of a heavily secured, unmarked building. He was ruthless, brilliant, and completely terrifying to anyone who sat across a negotiating table from him. He was also my silent business partner. 5 years ago, I audited a massive corporate merger for his firm. I found a microscopic discrepancy that saved him $40 million. He recognized my talent immediately. While Bennett was busy calling me a glorified paper pusher, Marcus was secretly backing my private investments. He knew my true net worth. He knew I was a multimillionaire operating completely in the shadows, building a portfolio that dwarfed the collective wealth of my husband's entire arrogant family. I walked past his security detail and stepped into his vast glass-walled office. Marcus sat behind a solid marble desk surrounded by monitors displaying global market feeds. He looked up, his sharp eyes immediately registering my unannounced arrival. I did not need an appointment. We had an understanding forged in mutual respect and highly profitable secrecy. "We have a situation," I stated, dropping the printed wire transfer request and the digital ledgers directly onto his marble desk. Marcus did not ask questions. He picked up the documents and began to read. His face remained a mask of absolute calm, as his eyes scanned the forged signature, the offshore routing numbers, and the undeniable proof of Jamal's Ponzi scheme. He traced the lines of fake commercial leases. He examined the recurring payments to the 24-year-old fitness instructor. He saw Bennett's digital authorization logs covering the entire mess. He read through the promissory note pledging my restricted trust assets to cover their fraudulent debts. "Your husband and his brother-in-law are remarkably stupid men," Marcus finally said, setting the papers down flat on the marble surface. This is a grade school fraud operation. They are bleeding cash and trying to use your trust as a tourniquet. How do you want to play this? I sat down in the leather chair opposite him. I want to own them, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I want to own every single breath they take. I do not just want to block this $2 million wire transfer. I want to sever their lifelines entirely. I want to control the ground they walk on. Marcus leaned forward, steepling his fingers together. He thrived on this exact kind of corporate warfare. Jamal's primary commercial debt is held by a mid-tier lender in Chicago. I happen to know the executive board. They are already getting nervous about Jamal's lack of development progress and his missed interest payments. If I make a call right now, my firm can purchase his entire debt portfolio by 3 o'clock this afternoon. We buy the debt at a slight premium to guarantee immediate transfer, and we bypass the standard waiting periods. I met his gaze without blinking. Do it. Use the liquid capital from my hidden holding company. I want that debt. I want his name attached to my ledger. Marcus smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile that rarely reached his eyes. You realize what this means, Olivia. The second we execute this purchase, Jamal's shell company is legally bound to you. You become his primary creditor. You hold the mortgages on his properties. You hold the liens on his vehicles. You control his operational liquidity. If he misses a single payment, you have the legal authority to seize everything he claims to own. He will be working for you, and he will not even know it. Make the call, I commanded. Marcus picked up his private phone. He dialed a direct line to Chicago. He spoke in low, rapid financial shorthand, cutting through the usual pleasantries. He utilized his immense corporate weight to fast-track the acquisition, offering a premium payout that the nervous bank executives could not possibly refuse. Within 20 minutes, the digital contracts were drafted and sent to our secure server. Within 30 minutes, the funds were wired from my hidden offshore accounts. Within 45 minutes, the final signatures were executed. I legally owned every single asset Jamal falsely paraded around town. I sat back in the leather chair and let the reality wash over me. The shift in power was absolute. For years I had played the meek, submissive wife. For years I had let Bennett talk down to me, belittle my career, and treat me like an incompetent child who needed a man to manage her life. I had let Vanessa mock my clothes and my quiet demeanor during family dinners. I had let Jamal lecture me about the reality of aggressive wealth while he sipped expensive scotch paid for with stolen money. They thought I was weak. They thought I was blind. They thought I was prey. I am the predator. I stood up and smoothed the front of my skirt. Marcus handed me a secure tablet confirming the finalized debt transfer and the updated creditor registry. The trap was perfectly laid. Bennett and Jamal thought they were days away from stealing $2 million of my money. Instead, they had just handed me the keys to their entire fraudulent empire. I thanked Marcus and walked out of the building. The afternoon sun felt warm and invigorating against my skin. I was no longer playing defense. I was dictating the terms of their destruction. I sat on a park bench near the financial district and pulled my phone from my pocket. I needed to check my personal email to confirm my wealth manager had successfully frozen the forged wire transfer. As I unlocked the screen, a social media notification popped up. It was a new post from Vanessa. I clicked the notification. The image loaded instantly on my screen. Vanessa was sitting at a table in a high-end exclusive French restaurant. She was holding up a brand new limited edition designer handbag. The leather was pristine. The gold hardware gleamed under the expensive restaurant lighting. She had a smug, arrogant smile plastered across her face, perfectly curated for her followers. The caption beneath the photo read, "Spoiled rotten. Thank you to my amazing husband Jamal for the best surprise gift ever. True wealth is treating your family right." I stared at the caption. I looked at the gleaming designer bag. I knew exactly which credit card Jamal used to make those lavish purchases. It was the primary corporate expense card tied directly to Apex Holdings, his commercial real estate firm. The exact same firm that I now legally owned. The exact same firm whose accounts I had just instructed Marcus to place under immediate strict forensic review. I locked my phone and slid it back into my coat pocket. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Vanessa was posing for the world, thanking her amazing husband for his boundless generosity. She had absolutely no idea that the credit card she was holding was scheduled to bounce in exactly 2 hours. The line went dead, leaving Jamal's threat ringing in the silence of my office. He thought he could bully me out of the financial industry. He thought his intimidation tactics would force me into submission. He fundamentally misunderstood the woman he was dealing with. I placed the phone face down on my desk. I did not panic. I opened a new message thread on my phone and added Bennett, Beverly, Vanessa, and Jamal. It was time to give them exactly what they wanted. If they wanted a broken, paranoid woman who needed her wealthy, capable family to save her from herself, I would deliver an Oscar-winning performance. I typed out the message slowly, carefully crafting every sentence to reek of desperation and defeat. I apologized for my erratic behavior over the past few days. I admitted that the stress of work and the sudden changes in my routine had clouded my judgment. I told them my mind was playing tricks on me and that the anxiety was becoming entirely unmanageable. I typed that Bennett was right, that I needed help, and that I was finally ready to relinquish control of my trust fund to the family for proper management. I invited them all to a private dining room at the Sovereign Club tomorrow evening so I could officially sign over the power of attorney documents. I hit send and waited. The replies arrived with predictable, greedy speed. Bennett responded first, adopting the tone of a benevolent, forgiving patriarch. He told me he was proud of me for taking this difficult step and that the family would handle everything. Beverly chimed in next, her text dripping with condescending affection, stating that she always knew I would eventually come to my senses. Vanessa sent a string of praying hands and heart emojis. Jamal did not reply, but a red receipt indicated he had seen the message. They had swallowed the bait whole. Their insatiable greed and their absolute certainty in their own superiority completely blinded them to the obvious trap. I locked my phone and immediately opened a secure encrypted communication portal on my desktop. I dialed a direct extension I had memorized 3 years ago during a massive federal audit. Special Agent Thomas Miller of the FBI White Collar Crime Division answered on the first ring. Miller and I had a mutual respect. During that previous audit, I had discreetly pointed his team toward a web of offshore shell companies that led to a major indictment. He knew I did not waste his time. "I have a delivery for you, Thomas," I said, keeping my voice low and professional. "I am transferring a highly organized, comprehensive data file directly to your secure server right now. It details a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate Ponzi scheme operating right here in the city." I hit the transfer button. The progress bar flashed across my screen. "You will find dozens of fraudulent commercial mortgage applications." I continued outlining the contents while he listened intently. "You will find forged tenant leases used to inflate property valuations. You will find a clear paper trail of illegal dividend payouts funded entirely by new investor capital. The primary operator is Jamal Crawford of Apex Holdings. My husband Bennett is his chief financial accomplice." Miller whistled softly on the other end of the line. "This is a remarkably clean package, Olivia. You have handed us a turnkey prosecution. When do you want to move on this?" "Tomorrow night," I replied. 8 o'clock. They will all be gathered in the private dining room at the Sovereign Club. They think they are meeting me to take legal control of my personal assets. I want your agents waiting in the lobby when dessert is served." "Consider it done," Miller stated. "We will have federal warrants drafted by morning." I ended the call and cleared my browser history. My next call was to the private security firm guarding my house. I requested 2 highly trained plainclothes operatives to accompany me to the Sovereign Club. I needed them inside the dining room, blending in with the staff ready to intervene if Bennett or Jamal turned violent when the trap finally snapped shut. The security director confirmed the deployment without hesitation. Every piece was now in perfect position. The documents were filed. The authorities were mobilized. The family was eagerly marching toward their own execution. 24 hours later, I stood in the master bathroom of my heavily secured house. The silence around me was profound, broken only by the soft hum of the central air conditioning. I stared at my reflection in the large vanity mirror. For 5 years, I had dressed to blend in. I had worn muted colors, modest cuts, and minimal makeup. I had actively minimized my physical presence to avoid triggering Beverly's jealousy or Bennett's insecurities. I had made myself invisible so they could shine. I opened my makeup drawer and bypassed the neutral glosses I normally wore. I reached into the very back and pulled out a sleek, heavy gold tube of lipstick. It was a bold, unapologetic, vibrant crimson. I twisted the tube and carefully applied the color. The transformation was instant and striking. The bright red completely altered my face. It banished the quiet, compliant girl and revealed a woman who commanded absolute attention. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored black suit. I looked into my own eyes in the mirror. There was no hesitation left. The submissive paper-pushing sister-in-law they had underestimated for half a decade was officially dead. The private dining room I had reserved on the third floor was a masterpiece of intimidation. Heavy velvet curtains blocked out the city skyline. A massive crystal chandelier cast a harsh, brilliant light over the long dining table set for 5. 2 plainclothes operatives from my private security firm stood silently by the double doors, dressed perfectly as standard club staff. I checked the gold watch on my wrist. It was 7:45. Beverly was always early when money was involved. The heavy oak doors swung open. Beverly marched into the room. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that screamed desperate authority. Her eyes immediately darted around the room, assessing the wealth, calculating the cost of the reservation. She did not look at me. She looked at the table settings. She snapped her fingers at the operative standing by the door. "You," she barked. "Move these centerpieces. They are obstructing the sight lines. And switch out these water glasses. Move quickly." The operative did not blink. He glanced at me. I gave him a microscopic nod. He stepped forward and smoothly removed the floral arrangements. Beverly finally turned her attention to me. She looked at my bold red lipstick and frowned. "You look overdone, Olivia," she stated coldly. "Wipe that off before the men arrive." I did not move. I did not speak. I simply watched her pull out the chair directly to my right and sit down. She arranged her designer purse on the empty chair beside her, patting it as if it were a prized pet. The doors opened again at exactly 8 o'clock. Bennett walked in. The panicked, desperate man who had fled our bedroom was completely gone. He had replaced his fear with a sickening layer of smug arrogance. He wore a navy suit and a perfectly knotted silk tie. He walked straight toward me, leaning down to press a stiff kiss against my cheek. I let him play his part. "I am glad you finally saw reason," he murmured, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "We are going to get you the best doctors, Olivia. You will not have to worry about a single financial decision ever again. I will handle everything." He took the seat to my left. He shot a triumphant look across the table at his mother. Beverly smiled back, a tight, predatory stretching of her lips. "We are a family," Beverly announced. "We protect our own." A loud, booming laugh echoed from the hallway. Vanessa and Jamal made their entrance. They treated the dining room like a VIP nightclub section. Vanessa was draped in head-to-toe designer labels. The interlocking logos on her dress and the oversized hardware on her bag caught the chandelier light. I knew exactly what they were. High-end counterfeits, purchased to maintain the illusion of wealth while their actual bank accounts bled dry. Jamal walked in behind her. His chest puffed out, an unlit cigar clamped between his teeth. He clapped Bennett heavily on the shoulder before dropping into a chair next to Vanessa. "Bring the menu," Jamal shouted at the security operative near the wall. "Actually, do not even bother with the menu. Bring me your most expensive bottle of scotch. Make it the Macallan 50 year. We have a massive victory to celebrate tonight." Jamal leaned back and propped his feet up on the edge of the mahogany table. "The real estate market is mine," he boasted, looking directly at Bennett. "Apex Holdings just secured the Chicago capital. The expansion is fully funded. We are untouchable right now, Bennett. Completely untouchable." Bennett offered a strained, nervous laugh. He knew the Chicago capital was not secured. He knew he had illegally wired my money to plug the holes in Jamal's sinking ship, but he had to play along to keep the illusion alive for his mother and his sister. Vanessa pulled her phone out and started taking selfies, making sure the crystal chandelier was visible in the background. She angled the camera to capture her fake bag. Beverly slammed her hand flat against the table. The sharp crack made Vanessa drop her phone. Enough celebrating. Beverly snapped. Her eyes locked onto me with laser focus. Her greed could not wait another second. We are not here to eat appetizers. We are not here to drink expensive scotch. We are here to finalize a legal transfer. Olivia has admitted she is mentally unfit to manage her substantial assets. She has agreed to sign full power of attorney over to Bennett. Beverly reached into her leather briefcase. Where are the documents, Olivia? Put them on the table right now. We sign them before the first course is served. Bennett nodded eagerly. He pulled a gold fountain pen from his breast pocket and laid it on the table. It is for your own good, Olivia, he said smoothly. The stress is destroying you. Let us take the burden. I looked at the four of them. Beverly leaning forward like a starving vulture. Bennett clutching his gold pen. Vanessa pouting at her dropped phone. Jamal looking confused by the sudden shift in tone. I did not reach for my bag. I did not pull out a stack of legal papers. I locked eyes with Beverly. I slowly raised my right hand and snapped my fingers twice. The heavy oak doors swung open. The headwaiter stepped into the room. He walked with precise measured steps. He carried a polished silver tray. He approached the head of the table and stopped directly beside my chair. Beverly leaned forward, her eyes wide, expecting a stack of legal contracts. Bennett gripped his pen tighter. The waiter lowered the silver tray and placed it perfectly in the center of the mahogany table. There were no power of attorney documents on the tray. There were no medical release forms. There was no pen. There was only a single small black digital audio recorder. Its red recording light blinked steadily in the silent room. Beverly stared at the small black device resting on the polished silver tray. Her perfectly manicured fingers twitched against the mahogany table. She blinked twice completely, failing to comprehend what she was looking at. She expected thick stacks of legal paper. She expected a terrified daughter-in-law eagerly signing away her financial autonomy to secure the family peace. She did not expect a piece of digital electronics. "What is this?" Beverly demanded, her voice sharp with immediate irritation. "Is this some kind of sick joke, Olivia? I told you to bring the power of attorney documents. We are not playing games tonight." Bennett frowned. He slowly lowered his gold fountain pen. He looked at the blinking red light on the recorder, and a profound primal fear suddenly washed over his handsome features. The artificial confidence he had carried into the room began to evaporate. He looked at my face, searching for the fragile, broken woman he thought he had successfully bullied into submission yesterday morning. He found absolutely nothing but cold, calculated resolve. Vanessa let out a loud, theatrical sigh. She crossed her arms over her chest, causing the counterfeit logos on her dress to stretch. "Honestly, Olivia, you are always trying to ruin a good mood. Jamal just secured the Chicago deal. Can you not just be happy for the family for one single night? Just sign the papers so we can order dinner. I am starving." I did not answer her. I kept my eyes locked directly on Bennett. I reached forward with a steady hand. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the audio recorder. I pressed the play button. A sharp crackle of static filled the private dining room, immediately followed by the unmistakable booming voice of Jamal Crawford. "We just need her signature on the bottom line." Jamal's recorded voice echoed loudly off the velvet walls. "The offshore account is already set up and waiting. The second Bennett gets her to sign that release, I wire the $2 million straight to the Chicago lenders. It covers the missing dividends perfectly." The color instantly drained from Vanessa's face. Her mouth fell open. "Are you sure it will look authentic?" Vanessa's own recorded voice chimed in from the small speaker. "Because if the bank flags it, we are completely screwed. You promised me this would be clean, Jamal. You promised me the new condo was secure." "It is a foolproof mock-up," Jamal's voice replied on the recording, dripping with arrogant amusement. Dave from marketing practically traced her signature from her old wedding registry files. "It is a perfect forgery. Besides, the stupid woman never reads anything Bennett puts in front of her anyway. She is too busy playing the dutiful little house mouse. She will sign the medical release and she will sign the asset transfer without even blinking. $2 million solves all of our liquidity problems by Friday morning. We will tell her it went into a high-yield family trust." I reached forward and pressed the stop button. The red light stopped blinking. The silence is absolute. The silence is deafening. The silence is the sound of their world ending. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The air in the opulent dining room suddenly felt incredibly thin. Beverly sat frozen in her chair, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. The flawless matriarch who had orchestrated my psychological torment for 5 years finally realized she was sitting in the middle of a federal crime scene. She looked at Jamal with a mixture of disgust and sheer panic. Vanessa stared at the black device as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the silver tray. Her hands shook violently against her lap. Bennett was the first to break the paralysis. The reality of the recording hit him with the force of a freight train. That audio file proved wire fraud. It proved conspiracy to commit forgery. It proved embezzlement. It was a direct, undeniable ticket to a federal penitentiary. His survival instincts hijacked his brain. His face twisted into a mask of pure, desperate rage. "Give me that!" Bennett roared. He lunged across the wide mahogany table. He knocked over his crystal water glass. The water shattered across the wood, soaking the expensive linen napkins. His large hands clawed desperately through the air, reaching directly for the silver tray to smash the digital recorder into pieces. He never even made it halfway. The private security operative who had been posing as our waiter moved with terrifying practiced speed. He stepped out of the shadows near the velvet curtains. He grabbed Bennett by the back of his expensive navy suit collar and his right shoulder. With one swift, brutal motion, the operative yanked Bennett backward and slammed him violently down into his heavy dining chair. Bennett choked as the breath was forced from his lungs. He tried to stand back up, swinging his arms wildly. A second operative stepped out from the hallway, stepping directly behind Bennett. The second operative placed a heavy, unyielding hand on Bennett's left shoulder, pinning him completely to the chair. "Do not attempt to move again, sir," the first operative stated. His voice was calm, deep, and carried the unmistakable authority of a man who was trained to inflict severe physical damage. "Keep your hands flat on the table. Do it now." Bennett swallowed hard. He looked at the two large, muscular men flanking his chair. He looked at their earpieces. He finally realized they were not restaurant staff. He slowly raised his trembling hands and placed them flat against the wet mahogany wood. His chest heaved as he gasped for air. He looked at me with wild, terrified eyes. Beverly clutched her pearls. Her mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no words came out. The powerful, commanding woman who had dictated my every move for half a decade was reduced to a trembling, speechless spectator. Jamal pushed his chair back slightly. The loud scrape of wood against the floor broke the tension. He ran a hand over his face and let out a loud, forced laugh. It was a pathetic, hollow sound that echoed awkwardly in the tense room. "This is a joke," Jamal scoffed, pointing a shaking finger at the audio recorder. "This is an absolute joke. You actually expect us to believe that is real. You are pathetic, Olivia. You really are. Everyone knows about artificial intelligence voice cloning these days. You used some cheap software to generate a fake audio file because you are bitter and jealous of my success. That recording would never hold up in any court of law. It is completely inadmissible. You have no proof of anything. You are just a crazy woman playing stupid parlor games." I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached down to the floor beside my chair. I picked up the thick, heavy legal binder I had brought with me. I lifted it high and tossed it directly across the table. It landed right in front of Jamal with a massive, satisfying thud. The heavy binder sat in front of Jamal like a manifestation of doom. I did not give him time to formulate an excuse. I raised my left hand. The second operative, who was still standing guard behind Bennett, stepped away and walked to a mahogany credenza in the corner. He opened the cabinet and retrieved 4 identical black binders. He moved silently around the table, placing a binder in front of Bennett, Beverly, and Vanessa. I opened my own copy. "I suggest you open them," I said evenly. "You are going to want to follow along." Beverly stared at the cover in absolute terror. Bennett kept his hands glued to the table, too terrified of the operatives to make a sudden move. Jamal stubbornly crossed his arms, refusing to touch the binder. Vanessa could not resist her own frantic curiosity. She flipped the heavy plastic cover open. Her eyes darted across the dense columns of numbers and legal text. "This is a comprehensive forensic accounting report," I stated. "I commissioned it 3 months ago. I employed a team of auditors who specialize in unwinding corporate fraud. They spent the last 12 weeks completely dismantling the financial architecture of Apex Holdings." Jamal let out a sharp, derisive scoff, but his eyes betrayed his growing panic. "You have no legal right to look into my company," he spat, though his voice lacked its usual booming resonance. I ignored his outburst and turned to the first tab. "Page 1, I instructed. Let us look at your so-called Chicago capital expansion." The numbers are incredibly illuminating. Apex Holdings has not generated a single dollar of legitimate profit in over 4 years. Your entire commercial real estate empire is a textbook Ponzi scheme. You secure new investor capital by promising inflated returns based on fraudulent property valuations. You take that fresh capital and use it to pay illegal dividends to your earliest investors, maintaining the illusion of success. Bennett flinched. His face turned an ashen gray. He knew exactly what I was describing because he was the one helping Jamal shuffle the dirty money through our accounts. "You forged tenant leases to make empty buildings look fully occupied," I continued, my voice striking the room like a hammer hitting an anvil. "You create fake holding companies to purchase properties from yourself at highly inflated prices, artificially driving up the market value on paper. It is a brilliant, vicious circle of fraud, Jamal. But it requires a constant, massive influx of new cash to keep the entire structure from collapsing. That is why you were so desperate for my $2 million. You needed my money to pay out the Chicago lenders before they realized your collateral was entirely worthless." Beverly finally reached out with a trembling hand and opened her binder. She stared at the highlighted columns. Her jaw worked silently. The matriarch, who prided herself on absolute control, was finally seeing the catastrophic mess her golden son-in-law had created right under her nose. Jamal leaned forward, gripping the edge of the mahogany table. His knuckles turned stark white. "You are bluffing," he hissed, a bead of sweat forming at his hairline. "These are fabricated numbers. You cannot prove any of this. I have top-tier accountants. I have lawyers who will bury you for this defamation." I turned to the next tab in my binder. "Page 3. Jamal," I said softly. "I did not just investigate your fraudulent empire. I took action. Your primary corporate debt was held by Vanguard Financial. They held the mortgages on all 7 of your downtown commercial properties. Because your payments have been late for 6 consecutive months, Vanguard classified your portfolio as high-risk distressed debt. They were quietly looking to offload it to mitigate their own exposure." Jamal stopped breathing. The color drained from his face with terrifying speed. "I bought it," I stated flatly. "I liquidated a portion of my grandfather's trust fund, the exact fund you and Bennett were trying to steal from me tonight. And I purchased your entire debt portfolio through an anonymous holding company yesterday afternoon." Jamal stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. The cigar fell from his fingers and rolled across the table, leaving a trail of gray ash on the pristine white tablecloth. He reached up with a shaking hand and yanked at the knot of his expensive silk tie, pulling it loose, as if it were suddenly choking him. The arrogant, untouchable real estate mogul was disintegrating right in front of me. Heavy sweat poured down his forehead, stinging his eyes. I looked him dead in the eye. "I own you, Jamal. I own your commercial buildings. I own your corporate headquarters. I own the loans on your personal vehicles. And because you are in gross violation of the covenant terms by committing systemic fraud, I am legally executing an immediate call on the entire principal balance. I am foreclosing on every single one of your properties starting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. You are bankrupt. You are penniless. And when the FBI finishes raiding your offices tomorrow afternoon, you are going to federal prison." A sharp, piercing scream shattered the heavy silence. Vanessa leaped out of her chair. Her designer chair crashed backward onto the floor. She turned toward Jamal, her face twisted in a mask of absolute horror and furious betrayal. "What did you do?" Vanessa shrieked, slamming her fists onto the table. Her voice cracked with genuine hysteria. "Tell me she is lying, Jamal. Tell me we are not bankrupt." My credit cards were declined this morning at the boutique. You told me it was a bank error. You told me the Chicago money was clearing tonight. We have 3 mortgages on the house. What about my lifestyle? What about my money? Jamal did not answer her. He just stared at the open binder. I slammed my hand against the table. I highly suggest that you turn to page 4, Vanessa. Vanessa grabbed the heavy paper of page 4. She stared at the black ink. Her eyes darted back and forth across the top paragraph. She read the bold print of the leasing company. She read the address of the luxury building in the most expensive district of the city. She read the name on the primary tenant line. It was a lease agreement for a penthouse suite. The monthly rent was staggering. But the tenant name was not Jamal Crawford. The tenant name was Chloe Vance. And right beneath the tenant name was the billing authorization. The rent was being automatically drafted from a platinum credit line. A credit line registered solely in the name of Vanessa Crawford. Vanessa looked up from the binder. Her face was entirely drained of color. The counterfeit designer dress she wore seemed to hang loosely on her suddenly rigid frame. She looked at Jamal. Jamal could not meet her gaze. He stared fixedly at the wet mahogany table. He swallowed hard. The silence stretched until it felt like the walls were closing in on us. "Who is Chloe?" Vanessa asked. Her voice was a low, dangerous whisper. "Who is Chloe Jamal?" Jamal opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. He wiped his sweating forehead with the back of his hand. "You rented an apartment for a woman named Chloe Vanessa?" stated her voice rising in pitch and volume with every single syllable. "You rented a luxury penthouse for your mistress using my personal credit line. You maxed out my credit to finance your affair while you bought me fake handbags to keep me quiet. You stole my name to pay for your filthy secrets." Jamal raised his hands in a weak, placating gesture. "Baby, please," he stammered. "Let me explain. It is just a business arrangement. She is a consultant. It is a corporate expense." "You are a liar," Vanessa screamed. Her voice echoed off the crystal chandelier, sharp and unhinged. "You are a disgusting, pathetic liar." Vanessa lunged. She threw herself across the corner of the table, her hands curled into claws. She aimed directly for his face. Her manicured nails caught his cheek, tearing a long, bloody scratch from his eye down to his jawline. Jamal yelled in pain and stumbled backward, his chair tipping over. He hit the floor hard. Vanessa did not stop. She scrambled over the fallen chair, kicking wildly, screaming insults that tore through the refined atmosphere of the Sovereign Club. She grabbed his ruined silk tie and pulled it, choking him as she rained blows onto his chest and shoulders. The perfect family image was violently, irreparably dismantled. They were tearing each other apart like wild animals. The operative who had restrained Bennett moved immediately. He stepped away from Bennett and grabbed Vanessa around her waist. He lifted her effortlessly off the floor, pulling her away from the cowering Jamal. Vanessa kicked and thrashed against the guards, screaming incoherently. The operative set her down firmly in the corner of the room, blocking her path back to the table. "Sit down and remain calm," the operative commanded. His tone left absolutely no room for negotiation. Vanessa collapsed against the wall, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Jamal scrambled backward against the velvet curtains, holding his bleeding face. He looked like a cornered rat. Beverly slammed both of her hands flat against the mahogany table. The sound cracked like a gunshot over the sobbing of Vanessa. "Enough," Beverly roared. Her face was red with fury. Her perfectly coiffed hair trembled with her rage. She glared at me with absolute, unadulterated hatred. "Stop this right now, Olivia. Look at what you are doing. You are tearing this family apart. You are destroying us over a petty, vindictive grudge. You drag us here, you wave these ridiculous fabricated papers around, and you turn my children against each other. You are a monster. We took you in. We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us, by burning our lives to the ground. Stop this immediately and tell these hired thugs to let my family go." I watched the desperate, furious performance. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I slowly closed my copy of the binder. I rested my hands on top of the black cover. I turned my gaze slowly, deliberately, to meet her furious eyes. The anger in her face began to falter under my icy stare. I let the silence hang for 5 agonizing seconds. I let her feel the full weight of the trap she had walked into. "I am not tearing this family apart, Beverly," I stated calmly. "I am simply exposing the rot that was already here, the rot that you actively cultivated." Beverly lifted her chin defensively. "I do not know what you are talking about." "You are insane. You know exactly what I'm talking about." I continued, my voice kept level. "You are outraged that Vanessa is humiliated. You are outraged that Jamal is ruined. You are outraged that your perfect family image is shattered. But you are not shocked by his infidelity. You are not shocked by the mistress." Vanessa stopped sobbing. She lifted her tear-streaked face from her hands and looked toward the table. I leaned slightly closer to Beverly. The matriarch shrank back, pressing herself against her chair. "You are not shocked," I repeated, ensuring every word landed with devastating precision. "Because you knew about Chloe Vance all along. You knew about the luxury penthouse. You knew Jamal was betraying your daughter. You did not just know it, Beverly. You actively helped him hide the expenses from Vanessa. You covered his tracks. You signed the transfer orders. You approved the wire drafts from her accounts to keep the precious Apex Holdings illusion perfectly intact. You sold your own daughter out for the sake of your own greed. The house of cards is completely crumbling down. And now everyone in this room knows exactly who you are." Bennett gripped the brass handles of the heavy oak doors, his knuckles white with desperate anticipation. He yanked them inward, fully intending to sprint down the carpeted hallway and escape into the warm Chicago night. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching painfully in his throat. The escape route was completely blocked. 2 tall figures stood shoulder to shoulder in the corridor, their silhouettes framed by the dim amber lighting of the Sovereign Club. They stepped forward in perfect unison, forcing Bennett to stumble backward into the private dining room. As they crossed the threshold, the bright light from the crystal chandelier illuminated the gold shields pinned securely to their belts. The FBI had officially arrived. The lead agent was a woman with sharp, observant eyes and a demeanor that commanded instant obedience. She wore a tailored dark suit beneath a navy windbreaker that bore the bold yellow letters of the Bureau across the front. Her partner, a broad-shouldered man with a closely cropped haircut, stepped in right behind her. He immediately moved to the right, his eyes sweeping the room, assessing the 2 private security operatives, the overturned chairs, and the weeping women. The sudden presence of federal law enforcement sucked all the remaining oxygen from the room. Vanessa instantly ceased her frantic sobbing, her breath hitching as she stared at the glowing badges. Beverly sat frozen, her posture rigid, her hands gripping the edges of her binder so tightly, her French manicured fingernails dug into the plastic cover. Jamal remained on the floor, his bleeding face turned upward in a mask of total incomprehension. The female agent did not waste a single second surveying the wreckage of the family dinner. She retrieved a folded document from her jacket pocket, unfolded it with a sharp snap, and fixed her unblinking gaze directly on the 2 men. "Jamal Marcus Crawford." The agent announced, her voice echoing off the velvet walls with terrifying clarity. "Bennett Harrison, Preston. You are both being placed under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Bennett let out a strangled gasp, retreating until his spine hit the mahogany credenza. Jamal tried to push himself up from the floor, but his arms trembled so violently that he simply collapsed back onto the plush carpet. The male agent stepped forward, closing the distance between the door and the table in 3 long, purposeful strides. He reached to his belt and withdrew a pair of steel handcuffs. The female agent raised her voice, ensuring every single word resonated with absolute finality. "You are formally charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You are charged with multiple counts of bank fraud. You are charged with identity theft. And you are charged with aggravated forgery in connection with the unlawful transfer of corporate assets and trust fund manipulation." The list of federal offenses hung heavily in the air. Each individual charge represented years inside a federal penitentiary. The sheer magnitude of their crimes was no longer a secret confined to the pages of my forensic accounting report. The reality of the situation crashed down on Jamal with the force of an avalanche. The flashy, arrogant real estate developer, the man who had just minutes ago boasted about his untouchable empire, was instantly reduced to a weeping, pathetic mess. He dropped fully to his knees, his expensive custom-tailored suit wrinkling against the floor. He raised his hands in a posture of desperate surrender. "Please," Jamal begged, his booming voice shattering into a high-pitched whine. "Please, this is a massive misunderstanding. I have the money. I can fix the accounts. Please do not do this." The male agent ignored his pathetic pleas entirely. He grabbed Jamal by the shoulder, hauling him roughly to his feet. He twisted Jamal's arms securely behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed loudly across the dining room. It was the definitive sound of a life ending. Bennett watched the cuffs secure his brother-in-law, and pure, unadulterated panic overtook his brain. The sophisticated veneer he had spent his entire life cultivating vanished. The raw, cowardly survival instinct of a desperate man took complete control of his actions. Bennett spun away from the agents and pointed a shaking finger directly at his own mother. He threw Beverly under the bus without a fraction of a second of hesitation. "It was her!" Bennett shouted, his voice cracking with hysterical fear. "I did not want to do any of it. Beverly orchestrated the entire forgery scheme. She forced me to falsify the trust documents. She told me to bypass the signature restrictions. I was just following her orders. She controls the family accounts. You need to arrest her, not me. She is the mastermind behind the stolen funds." The entire room gasped. Vanessa stared at her brother in absolute disgust. Beverly looked as though she had been physically struck by lightning. The matriarch, who demanded absolute loyalty from her children, was watching her golden boy betray her to federal authorities just to save his own skin. The male agent did not hesitate. He marched straight over to Bennett, spun him around, and slammed him against the wall. A second pair of steel handcuffs clicked securely into place. Bennett sobbed, his face pressed against the expensive wallpaper, continuing to babble frantic accusations against his mother. Beverly leaped up from her chair, her face contorted into a mask of unprecedented fury. She was appalled, humiliated, and enraged beyond all measure. She refused to accept the reality of her own downfall. "I am a respectable woman," Beverly shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "I have absolutely nothing to do with these financial crimes. My own son is a pathetic liar." Then she turned her manicured, shaking finger directly toward me. Her eyes blazed with a manic, unhinged hatred. "She is a witch!" Beverly screamed, pointing at my face. "She framed us. She planted all of the fabricated evidence." Beverly's frantic accusations bounced harmlessly off the imposing figures of the two federal agents. The tall female agent did not even blink at the hysterical shrieking. She simply stepped to the side, allowing her broad partner to tighten the heavy steel cuffs around Bennett's wrists. Beverly continued to scream, her voice growing increasingly hoarse, demanding that they arrest me instead. The male agent finally turned his head, fixing the matriarch with a look of absolute chilling boredom. He informed her that if she continued to interfere with a federal arrest, she would find herself in the back of a transport vehicle facing serious obstruction charges. That singular heavy threat finally snapped Beverly's jaw shut. She sank back into her dining chair, her chest heaving, her eyes darting frantically around the room as the undeniable reality of her total defeat finally took hold. Bennett was still blabbering, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. He continued to throw his mother under the bus, insisting he was merely a pawn, a helpless victim of Beverly's financial machinations. The male agent gave Bennett's collar a sharp, violent tug, forcing him to stand up straight. He leaned in close to Bennett's face. The agent's voice was low, carrying a lethal calmness that instantly silenced the panicked executive. He explained the exact nature of the charges. He detailed how forging electronic signatures across state lines on federal loan applications was not a simple white-collar misstep. It triggered a mandatory minimum sentence. The agent methodically outlined the federal sentencing guidelines, emphasizing that Bennett was facing a minimum of 20 years without the possibility of parole. There would be no plea deal for the architect of the forgery. There would be no leniency. Bennett's knees buckled. The operative standing nearby had to grab his arm to keep him upright. Jamal was completely unresponsive. The booming, charismatic real estate tycoon had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, trembling shell of a man. Tears streamed down his ruined, bleeding face, mixing with the sweat and dripping onto his ruined silk shirt. He did not fight the handcuffs. He did not offer any defense. He simply stared blankly at the mahogany table, whispering his own name over and over again like a broken record. The female agent unclipped a radio from her belt and muttered a brief confirmation code. "It is time to go," she announced. She grabbed Jamal by the bicep and marched him toward the heavy oak doors. Her partner shoved Bennett forward. The private security operatives moved ahead, pulling the large wooden doors wide open. The sounds of the main dining room instantly flooded into our secluded space. The clinking of crystal, the soft hum of classical music, and the low murmur of the city's most elite socialites filled the air. The agents did not take them out through the discreet kitchen exit. They marched Bennett and Jamal directly through the center of the Sovereign Club. I followed them to the doorway and watched the spectacle unfold. It was a masterpiece of absolute social destruction. The entire restaurant fell dead silent. Senators, bank presidents, and wealthy socialites froze with their silver forks halfway to their mouths. They watched in unabashed shock as Jamal Crawford, the supposed golden boy of Chicago real estate, was paraded past their tables in steel handcuffs, openly weeping. They watched Bennett Preston, the pristine face of conservative wealth, stumbling along beside him, his designer suit rumpled and his face buried in his chest to hide his shame. The whispers started immediately, a tidal wave of vicious, gleeful gossip that would tear through the city before midnight. Their reputations were completely incinerated in less than 2 minutes. I turned away from the glorious spectacle and walked back to the center of the private dining room. Vanessa was sitting on the floor in the corner, her back pressed hard against the velvet wallpaper. She was hyperventilating. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow jerks. Her perfectly manicured hands clawed at her own hair, ruining her expensive blowout. The full weight of her new reality was crushing her lungs. She looked at me with wild, terrified eyes. She realized she was married to a federally indicted felon. She realized the bank accounts were completely frozen, the luxury cars would be repossessed, and the sprawling mansion was built on a foundation of stolen money. She realized she was entirely broke. Every fake friend she had in that dining room outside was currently laughing at her absolute destruction. Her counterfeit lifestyle was over forever. I looked down at her and then at Beverly, who was still paralyzed in her chair. I thought about every single time they had looked down their noses at me. I thought about the countless family dinners where they had called me worthless, treating me like an unwanted stray. I thought about Beverly constantly reminding me how incredibly lucky I was to be a part of their esteemed family, how I brought absolutely nothing of value to their prestigious bloodline. They had spent 5 years treating me like a charity case while quietly stealing my grandfather's inheritance to fund their pathetic, fraudulent existence. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my patience was stupidity. They were entirely wrong. I did not offer them a single ounce of pity. I simply took my seat at the head of the large table. The remaining private security operative walked forward carefully, carrying a black leather folder. He placed the restaurant bill directly in front of me. I retrieved a heavy, solid gold pen from my designer purse. I uncapped it smoothly, signed my name with a deliberate flourish, and wrote in a massive, generous tip for the attentive staff. I closed the heavy folder and stood up from the table. I looked down at Beverly, who was staring blankly at the wall, and then at Vanessa, gasping for air on the floor. "You have exactly 1 hour to get your things out of my house." I walked out of the Sovereign Club without looking back. The cool Chicago night air hit my face. My driver was waiting by the curb. I instructed him to take me directly to the Gold Coast estate. During the ride, I called the private security firm I had retained earlier that week. When my car pulled up to the mansion gates, a black SUV was already parked in the driveway. 3 security contractors stepped out of the vehicle, waiting in the dark for my command. We walked through the grand double doors of the estate. The great house was dead silent, but the ambient lighting cast long dramatic shadows across the marble foyer. For years I had walked through these halls feeling like an unwelcome intruder in my own inheritance. Tonight the marble felt warm under my feet. The oppressive weight of Beverly and her children was finally lifting from the walls. I signaled the security guards to follow me up the sweeping grand staircase. We bypassed the guest wing and headed straight for the primary suites. The sounds of frantic movement echoed from down the hall. Drawers were being slammed shut. Hangers were scraping loudly against metal closet rods. I stepped into the threshold of Beverly's massive bedroom. The sight before me was a masterpiece of poetic justice. The immaculate, curated perfection of her sanctuary had been utterly destroyed. Designer clothes, silk scarves, and expensive shoes were thrown haphazardly across the Persian rug. Vanessa was standing near the walk-in closet, violently shoving handfuls of cashmere blouses into a thick black plastic garbage bag. Her hands were shaking so severely she dropped a velvet jewelry box, scattering diamond earrings across the floor. Beverly was kneeling by her mahogany dresser, desperately trying to yank open a jammed drawer. She looked up when my shadow fell across the room. Her carefully sprayed hair was sticking up in jagged clumps. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in dark, wet streaks. The two women looked absolutely feral. Vanessa dropped her garbage bag. It hit the floor with a pathetic thud. "You are a monster," Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling with terror and revulsion. "You planned this from the very beginning. You set us up to lose everything." I crossed my arms and leaned casually against the doorframe. "I did not set you up, Vanessa. I simply stopped paying for the illusion. You and your mother destroyed yourselves the moment you decided to steal from my grandfather." The security guards stepped into the room behind me, their presence a silent, imposing threat. They stood with their hands clasped in front of them, watching the two women pack their stolen lives into trash bags. Beverly abandoned the jammed drawer. She scrambled across the floor, ignoring the scattered diamonds, and threw herself directly at my feet. The proud matriarch of the Preston family dropped entirely to her knees. She grabbed the hem of my coat, her fingers digging into the fabric like a drowning woman. "Olivia, please." Beverly sobbed, her voice a ragged, desperate wail. "Please do not do this to us. We have nowhere to go. The accounts are frozen. The credit lines are blocked. We cannot survive out there." I looked down at the woman who had made my life a living hell for half a decade. I remembered her sneers. I remembered her locking me out of family photos. I remembered her calling me a parasite while she secretly drained my inheritance to buy penthouses for Jamal and yachts for Bennett. I only wanted to secure the family legacy. Beverly cried, tears streaming freely down her ruined face. I was protecting the Preston name. I was making sure we maintained our standing. "You are family, Olivia. We took you in. You cannot throw family onto the street. Please show some mercy." I stared into her pleading, bloodshot eyes. I searched my heart for a single shred of empathy. I searched for the scared little girl who used to beg for their approval. She was completely gone. I feel nothing. I feel no pity. I feel no guilt. I feel only the cold, hard satisfaction of justice. I reached down and forcibly pried her fingers off my coat, dropping her hands back onto the floor. "You do not know the meaning of the word family." I stated, my voice echoing with icy detachment. "You only know the meaning of greed." I stepped back, putting distance between myself and the sobbing woman on the floor. I opened my leather handbag and retrieved a thick manila envelope. I tossed it onto the floor, right next to Beverly's trembling hands. The heavy packet landed with a solid smack against the hardwood. "What is this?" Vanessa stammered, backing away toward the closet. "It is your future," I replied smoothly. "The federal agents took care of the wire fraud and the bank loans tonight, but they left the civil matters to me. That is a formal legal notice of a massive civil lawsuit. I am suing both of you for every single cent of emotional and financial damage you have caused me over the last 5 years. I am suing you for the fraudulent medical claims you filed in my name. I am suing you for the extensive forgery on my personal accounts." I am going to garnish any future wages you ever earn, seize any hidden assets you manage to stash away, and ensure that neither of you can ever open a bank account or sign a lease without my legal team being notified." Beverly let out a breathless, horrified gasp. She stared at the manila envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "The timer is ticking," I announced, checking my watch. "You have exactly 14 short minutes left to finish filling up those garbage bags. When the clock runs out, my security team will physically drag you out the front door, regardless of what you are wearing or what you are holding. Get out of my house." Exactly 3 weeks passed since the night the Preston Empire crumbled. The heavy doors of the federal courthouse swung open, revealing a packed gallery humming with anticipation. I walked down the center aisle, the click of my heels cutting through the noise. My legal team flanked me, an impenetrable wall of custom tailoring and ruthless efficiency. I took a seat in the second row, perfectly positioned to witness the final destruction of the men who built their lives on my stolen inheritance. The side door clicked open. The heavy clanking of metal chains silenced the room instantly. Jamal Crawford and Bennett Preston shuffled into the harsh fluorescent light. The transformation was absolute. The Italian silk suits and imported leather shoes were gone. They wore orange jumpsuits that hung loosely on their gaunt frames. Their wrists were shackled to a waist chain, forcing them into a humiliating hunch. Jamal looked at the floor, his face hollow, his skin a sickly pallor. The charismatic mogul was dead. Bennett trembled visibly. His eyes darted around the gallery like a cornered animal before locking onto mine. He looked away instantly, his shoulders collapsing. Their unearned arrogance had been erased by 21 days in lockup. The federal judge, a stern man with zero tolerance for white-collar criminals, took his seat. He did not waste time. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the men. The prosecution laid out their case with devastating precision. They detailed the millions systematically siphoned from my grandfather's trusts. They presented forged signatures, shell companies, penthouses, and offshore accounts. The fraud scale was staggering, the evidence insurmountable. The defense attorneys stood offering pathetic pleas for leniency. They cited Jamal's community ties and Bennett's clean record. They begged for bail, promising ankle monitors and surrendered passports. The judge leaned forward, his expression hardening. He dismantled their arguments. He stated that forging federal loan documents and orchestrating massive fraud demonstrated profound disrespect for the law. He noted their extensive network of offshore accounts. "You possess the means, the contacts, and the proven inclination to deceive the judge," announced his voice echoing. "You represent a massive flight risk. Furthermore, the sheer scale of this financial fraud presents a continuing danger to the community. Bail is unconditionally denied. The defendants will remain in federal custody pending trial." Jamal let out a strangled sob. His knees buckled. A federal marshal grabbed his collar to keep him from collapsing. Bennett squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head as if trying to wake up. The sharp clack of the judge's gavel sounded like a gunshot. The marshals grabbed both men by the arms, turned them roughly, and marched them through the side door. The chains rattled against the floor, a grim soundtrack to the end of their lavish lives. I stood up, smoothing my trench coat. My lead attorney offered a satisfied nod, and we moved toward the main exit. The marble hallway was a frenzy of activity, but the real chaos awaited us outside. We pushed through the revolving doors and stepped onto the concrete steps of the courthouse plaza. The morning air was crisp, but the atmosphere was suffocating. A massive swarm of reporters, camera crews, and aggressive photographers jammed the plaza. The media smelled blood. The downfall of the prominent Preston family was the biggest scandal Chicago had seen in a decade. At the bottom of the steps, trapped in the center of the media circus, stood Beverly and Vanessa. They looked entirely unrecognizable. They had been evicted from my estate 3 weeks ago with nothing but trash bags. The frozen bank accounts and pending civil lawsuits had stripped them of their wealth, their staff, and their elite protection. Beverly wore a wrinkled coat that looked like it came from a discount rack. Her signature blowout was flat and stringy. Vanessa had a cheap scarf wrapped tightly around her head, wearing oversized sunglasses to hide her swollen, tear-stained face. They were backed against a concrete pillar, desperately trying to shield themselves from blinding camera flashes. Reporters shoved microphones into their faces, shouting rapid-fire questions. How does it feel to know your son is a federal criminal? Beverly. Vanessa. Did you know your luxury penthouse was paid for with stolen money? Are you both prepared for the upcoming civil trial? How are you surviving without the trust funds? The two women cowered together, disgraced, destitute, and publicly humiliated. Beverly raised her hands, trying to push the cameras away, looking frail. Vanessa sobbed openly, burying her face against her mother's shoulder to hide from the relentless execution. They spent their lives obsessing over their image, tearing me down to elevate their fake prestige. Now the city watched them burn. I walked slowly down the concrete steps. My security detail carved a wide, effortless path through the dense crowd. I did not slow my pace. I did not turn my head. I walked directly past Beverly and Vanessa, my gaze fixed firmly on the horizon. I completely ignored their existence. They were no longer a threat. They were no longer family. They were just two desperate strangers fading into the background noise of my city. My driver opened the door of a sleek luxury town car waiting at the curb. I slid into the soft leather interior, the heavy door thudding shut and instantly silencing the chaotic screaming outside. The car pulled smoothly away, leaving the ruins of the Preston Empire far behind me. I took a deep breath, savoring the profound silence of the luxury cabin. My cell phone suddenly vibrated against the seat. I picked it up and glanced at the bright screen. It was Marcus, my senior partner at the private equity firm. I swiped to answer the call. Olivia, Marcus said, his voice crackling with high-stakes energy. The final legal paperwork just cleared. The board voted unanimously. We have the green light on the Apex Holdings acquisition. Are you absolutely ready to officially step in and take over? I held the phone to my ear, listening to the sharp, triumphant edge in his voice as the city lights blurred past my tinted window. I gave him the authorization to execute the final transfer without a single ounce of hesitation. The corporate acquisition was the ultimate victory of the decade, a brutal dismantling of a corrupt enterprise, but for me, it was merely the appetizer. The genuine prize was a specific physical asset buried deep within the heavily liquidated portfolio. It was a sprawling, highly modern commercial building located squarely in the prestigious heart of the financial district. Just 6 months ago, Jamal had stood proudly in its expansive glass atrium, swirling an expensive scotch and boasting to foreign investors about his untouchable real estate empire. He had used my stolen inheritance to finance the initial development, and when the federal agents froze his illicit accounts, the property went into immediate foreclosure. I bought it back for absolute pennies on the dollar through a blind trust. I did not just purchase prime commercial real estate. I purchased the very monument to his staggering arrogance, quietly reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The renovation process commenced the very next morning and took exactly 3 months of relentless daily labor. I ordered the elite construction crews to completely gut the entire interior structure. I stood in the lobby and watched them strip away the tacky gold trim, the heavy imported marble columns, and the ridiculous mirrored ceilings Jamal had installed solely to stroke his own massive ego. We replaced his gaudy aesthetic with clean architectural lines, brushed steel accents, and reinforced tall glass windows that allowed brilliant natural light to flood into every single workspace. The building was no longer a monument to male vanity and corporate greed. It was transformed into a sleek fortress of absolute financial transparency. I named the new venture Vanguard Auditing. We were an independent forensic accounting firm with a highly specialized mission. We worked exclusively to protect women from complex financial abuse. My hand-picked team of ruthless accountants analyzed restricted trust funds, exposed hidden offshore accounts, and systematically dismantled the fraudulent portfolios of men who wrongly believed they could steal from their wives and daughters without facing any severe consequences. I took the exact weapon the Preston family had utilized in their attempt to destroy me and forged it into an impenetrable shield for others. We quickly became the absolute worst nightmare for every corrupt patriarch, deceitful husband, and greedy executive in the city of Chicago. We did not just audit their books. We exposed their deepest, darkest financial secrets to the brutal light of day. The waiting list for our specialized services grew exponentially with every passing week. Women who had been silenced, marginalized, and financially suffocated by their own families finally had a dedicated army fighting relentlessly on their behalf. I walked the quiet, bustling floors of my firm, listening to the rhythmic clicking of keyboards and the hushed, intense conversations of my investigators. Every solved case, every recovered asset, and every exposed fraudster felt like another profound victory over the toxic legacy Beverly had tried to force upon me. The prestigious Preston name was now nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in corporate boardrooms, while my own name commanded absolute, unyielding respect. I had rewritten the power dynamic of the entire financial sector. I walked slowly into the center of my massive corner office on the top floor of the building. The space was immense and commanding, decorated in cool slate tones, with a sprawling minimalist desk crafted from reclaimed walnut. I moved purposefully toward the panoramic windows, pressing my palm flat against the cool, thick glass. The sprawling Chicago skyline stretched out infinitely before me, a glittering, breathtaking sea of steel, concrete, and electric light. The city looked entirely different from this elevated vantage point. It no longer looked like an intimidating, overwhelming labyrinth controlled exclusively by wealthy, manipulative people like Beverly and Bennett. It looked like a vast chessboard, and I was finally the grandmaster moving the pivotal pieces. I looked down at the darkened streets far below, watching the tiny streaming headlights of evening traffic moving smoothly through the deep concrete canyons. I reflected deeply on the agonizing, brutal journey that had ultimately brought me to this exact spot. I thought about the terrified, desperate woman I had been when I first uncovered the missing funds. I thought about the suffocating fear. I did not just survive their raging fire. I became the fire. I turned away from the sprawling city skyline and walked back toward my immaculate desk. I tapped the spacebar on my laptop, waking up the massive dual monitors. I pulled up my private financial dashboards and reviewed my personal bank accounts. The screens glowed with rows of meticulously organized data. My grandfather's reclaimed inheritance was completely secure, shielded by ironclad legal trusts, and the numbers were multiplying steadily by the minute. The wealth they had tried to drain from my veins was now the undeniable lifeblood of my own growing empire. I looked down at my left hand. The heavy diamond-encrusted wedding ring still rested on my finger, a lingering physical shackle binding me to a past life built entirely on manipulation and deceit. I grasped the cold platinum band and slid it slowly over my knuckle. I felt the sudden distinct absence of its weight. I held the glittering diamond over the stainless steel trash can beside my desk and let it slip through my fingers. It hit the bottom with a hollow, meaningless metallic clink. I stared down at the discarded ring for a long moment, feeling a profound sense of absolute peace wash over my tired, triumphant soul. I took a very deep, long, satisfying breath. My long story ended not with chaotic violence or hysterical screaming, but with the quiet, undeniable power of a woman